and welcome to another episode of Life in the Mind, a neurodivergent podcast by neurodivergent people. I'm Joy Amy Wigman.
And I'm Marie Spear.
And we are joined again today by Dr. Catherine Jones. Hello, Catherine.
Hi there.
Hiya. So hopefully you've watched our first episode with Catherine, which was wonderful. You can watch this one first and then go back, but why would you do it in that order? Go and watch the previous one.
Yeah.
And then watch this. Oh. This is our topic episode.
Oh.
So
why did you listen to them out of order? No.
No. I'm sorry I suggested that. I will go and stand in the bad corner.
Autism Brain says no.
So really we wanted to talk about sensory issues and sensory rooms and things because Catherine basically does a lot of research into sensory. So just, if you can start off just telling us a little bit about what you do in that area.
Yeah, sure, of course. Maybe I'll tell it a bit sort of chronologically.
Yeah, lovely. We love it. Autistic, I love chronological.
So it all started, well, I've always been interested in doing bits of work around sensory experiences with autism, and sensory experiences came into the diagnostic criteria for autism in 2013, which had an impact, as you can imagine, on the research field, like realising there was a whole swathe of research and investigation to be done. But what happened for us was that someone called Katie Unwin, who went on to become my PhD student, approached me and said they'd like to come to Cardiff to do a PhD on sensory rooms, or they're often called multi-sensory environments. So these are these sensory spaces. You see them all over the place in, shopping centres, at airports, at football stadiums, in schools. And she wanted to know more about them and how they're being used for autistic people in the context that there was no real evidence base for them. So we didn't really understand how they were being used, why they were being used, if they had any benefit. But these rooms were expensive. So, it was a really worthwhile question. And she'd got a company called My Cares Design to donate a sensory room to the project. So Katie started with us. We also were lucky enough to establish a sensory room in Cardiff in the Wales Autism Research Centre. So we have this fantastic resource for our research. We're incredibly lucky. So that spearheaded it all. And we just sort of started off with Katie and we're like, well, how do we begin? Like, we just do not understand this area. And as a researcher, when you're really stuck and you're not knowing where to start, the best place can often be to speak to people. And we can do that with a technique called qualitative interviewing, where you interview people in depth about a topic and you can analyse that data in a certain way to bring out themes that are common across lots of different people. So you could get this insights, this nuance, this depth of understanding that is harder to get in other ways, for example, from giving people a survey, a questionnaire. So we did that with teachers who used sensory rooms with autistic pupils, mainly in special schools. And we found out a lot from that about how children use the rooms and what teachers think. But that was our starting point. Maybe I'll stop there because otherwise I'll talk in a monologue.
No, it's fine. We love a monologue.
So that's how I started.
Oh wow, that's amazing. I'm surprised that it was so late that the idea of sensory rooms helping came in. So did you say 2013? It became a diagnostic.
No, not sensory specifically. That was when the diagnostic sort of manual that we use officially recognised that sensory experiences could be unusual in autism. Okay. But in terms of sensory rooms, when we started doing it, which was later than 2013, there was no research at all of any sort of value or significance in autism. They're difficult. If you think about as a psychologist, when you're running an experiment, what do you want to do? You want to control things so you know what you're measuring. Sensory rooms don't lend themselves to control.
No.
So it was quite a tall order. So I think that's partly why these sort of spaces don't get research. There's a lot of practical challenges.
Yeah, there
but
must be.
We were up for it. We thought it was a really interesting area and with a lot of potential for making a worthwhile contribution.
Yeah, because I think most of the autistic people I know have some sort of sensory sensorially different profile to an established norm. And so even just that, in that, I can really see how much of a difference it would make. And like, even just from my experience, that was one of the things that I've struggled with the longest and was recognized first when I was a child. And actually, it was actually a sign of something.
Yeah.
But instead of that, I just had dark glasses at school. It's like, yes, you get light sensitive migraines. Okay, cool. But why? Nope. You have dark glasses now. Do that.
The why wasn't there.
No, the why wasn't there necessarily.
I find sensory rooms so interesting because I personally find them like a really great space. And if there's a sensory room somewhere, I will love to go and explore it. But I guess what I'm asking is, like, a sensory room, it like sparks your senses, doesn't it? So you've got a lot of input, and normally a lot of input would send me into a meltdown, like a sensory meltdown. But somehow a sensory room actually does the opposite. Like, is there a reason why it's not sparking overload, it's actually sparking comfort?
So I think that's a really good question, and I think that gets to the crux of it. Are they arousing the senses or calming the senses? It's all a bit confused. So we've done, well, there's two things that can speak to that. One piece of data that we've got out of the work we've done is that being in control of the sensory environment is really important. So I think that is probably a big reason why people can find them calming spaces. There's a lot more control of the sensory environment, be that obviously out there in the world things can be buzzing and knocking, and you're just aware that things could happen, whereas you're in a safer space in a sensory room. And if you're actually manipulating the equipment yourself, which isn't always possible, but if you're doing that, you really do have full control over that environment. So I think that's one of the keys. And certainly our most recent piece of work is talking to autistic adolescent pupils who use a sensory room at school. So these are all children or young people in a mainstream school. So they've spoken to us about that experiences. And again, it's about having that control, that sense of escape away from a noisy, difficult classroom where they can choose what they want to do, depending on their own needs. So I think it sort of crystallizes down to a sense of autonomy and choice. And I would say the other thing we grappled with, well, is there really anything special about a sensory space? Is it just that it's a space that isn't like the rest of the world? So it's just not the shopping centre, or it's not the school, and it could just be a quiet room. But we do interestingly get a sense from the pupils when we've spoken to them that there's something about what they're being offered that's really important. And I think it taps into that idea of sort of sensory bliss that autistic people can have from sensory experiences. So a lot of the young people talked about being in a trance-like state, and what it can do for them in a very positive way. And I had an interesting conversation because the researcher collecting the data is autistic, the PhD student, and I'm not, and I couldn't, I was like, wow, I don't really relate to that. What is that experience? How fabulous. But they could. Yeah. So it's really interesting sort of exchange and learning for me. We talked about, why I'm in this area. It's incredibly fascinating to understand more about how other people's brains work and how different we can all be.
I think there's also, like, one of the things I've found fascinating talking to you is, so I think you might be our first neurotypical person on the podcast.
Yeah, I think so.
We've always been open to that because neurotypical people work in areas with neurodivergence.
Yeah, it spreads the conversation. But what I think is really great about the research that you're doing, because you're doing it with and informed by autistic people, is that by you understanding it, you will better be able to explain and research so that other neurotypical people can understand it. And I think that's really vital, because it adds that level of understanding for people who might, like you say, be like, oh, I don't have anything that relates to that. Yeah, you're taking part in establishing a language
Yeah.
that can then be used and recognised by other neurotypical people or people that just don't have a similar experience. And
Yeah, I mean,
is
like
always
just other
valuable
neurodivergent
work.
people who aren't autistic.
Yeah, or don't have
it's
that
a different
specific
experience. Yeah.
So we all have our individual lexicon of definition and understanding of the world, and our own way of communicating that. And the more work we do on going, oh, you're different to me, so therefore you experience the world from your unique standpoint. And then the more work we do establishing that dialogue in between in all different ways it's just valuable, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is good stuff.
It is good stuff. I've sort of wondered with the sensory room if the thing that I find comforting is that I know where all the sensory stuff is coming from. I know that noise that I'm hearing is that specific thing that's happening in that room. I know that light is coming from that particular thing. I know what that feel is. So it takes the unknown out of it.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it. And when we've been thinking about what could the underpinning theories be that explain why an autistic person might benefit from a sensory room, we've been talking a bit about things like that the autistic brain often wants or needs predictability. And there are a lot of theories about that. So you're providing that predictability. So we really do think that, your lived experience there is reflecting the types of thoughts that we're having around why the space might be so beneficial, aligned with this idea that actually autistic people can have particular positive sensory experiences and perhaps get things out of sensory input that a neurotypical brain or neurotypical person wouldn't.
Yeah,
that makes complete sense. And it also establishes, like in my mind, that instantly highlights a difference between, so like at my secondary school, they had a quiet room, which was literally just a space you could go in where there were chairs and a table. My school wasn't great at pastoral care. But one of the big issues that I had with that space was it was on the ground floor, in quite a standard modern day building. So every now and again, it's just bang. What was that?
What was that?
What was that? And he's just like from upstairs or from a door slamming somewhere or someone slamming a locker or dropping their bag or something. And that uncertainty aspect, and the way that the external could come into the kind of that internal controlled space ruined it. And actually made it worse because I then felt trapped in this space because I was like, oh, but I'm here to be feeling better. I should stay here because then I'll be feeling better. And I couldn't go and investigate what the noise was. So that really makes sense in terms of that uncertainty principle that you were talking about.
Fixability.
And your language there maps onto research. This idea of intolerance of uncertainty is a thing. It's a sort of trait that we can see across people, but it's higher in certain groups. It's higher in autistic people. It's higher in people with high levels of anxiety. So you're not tolerating that uncertainty. So a space like a sensory room can really bring comfort, allow people to self-regulate and calm down because you're taking away all that attempts to manage a really difficult situation. I would say also we got something similar when we had interviewed the children. They're saying, sometimes they'll put a sensory tent up or a pod in the classroom, but it's exactly the same thing. It's no point being in a sensory space if you know there are loads of kids outside who you can hear.
Yeah.
So it's getting that insight because, people could look at the research and think, great, I'll set up a really cheap, nice and easy tent at the bottom of the classroom and do that with really good intentions. But the fact that we can note and provide this evidence that isn't sufficient can help educators make the right decisions about how they provide, these types of facility for autistic young people in schools.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I was reading an article yesterday on the BBC about people using noise cancelling headphones a lot these days. And it kind of just made me think about how much more of a thing that is these days. They're much more affordable. So they're much more available to everyone who needs them. There's much more background noise in the world. We are constantly in demand in some way or another from a noise, whether that's the buzzing of the fridge, people messaging us, or just people chatting away in another room. And so many people are choosing to use noise cancelling headphones in one way or another.
Because it takes out that unpredictability.
Yeah, I wonder whether it creates... It's a bit of a bubble. You know, it's creating your own sensory bubble, sensory space within your... Well, in a controlled way, which you move with. And then if you're doing that whilst also stimming, you know, fiddling with something, I'm fiddling with a tiny hammer.
Your tiny Mjolnir.
And it's actually a thunder hammer from Warhammer.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's a thunder hammer. It's not Mjolnir. I apologise.
No, that's all right.
Wrong Pantheon.
I'm not that basic. I'm a proper nerd.
Wrong Pantheon. Sorry.
But and it's stuff that autistic people have found their way to as well, in terms of it's led by the autistic community that we created our sensory bubbles. And so we almost sometimes carry, I wonder whether that's the thing.
Carrying your bubble.
A bubble with us,
Carrying a
sensory space.
bubble.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Makes sense to me.
It does. It's really interesting about, I suppose the boundaries of the sensory spaces that we create for ourselves, and how much can you protect yourself from the environment. And I guess it feeds into this idea that how accessible are sensory rooms. Are they really expensive? There's really expensive equipment. They might be in certain spaces, but you might not be lucky enough to have access to that. So that's another thing we're thinking about, is how can we create sensory environments in a cheaper or more accessible way? What is available for that? So we've got some work working with an organisation called Innovate Trust, who work with people with a learning disability who live in supported housing, and looking at their experiences of their home environment, the sensory environment at home, and looking at using smart technologies to kind of maybe create better spaces for them that take on board their sensory needs. So I think it sort of touches to me on a really interesting point about accessibility. How can we evolve things that it isn't about whether you've got access to a sensory room or not, but you're better able to find things around you to manage sensory needs.
Yeah, I think if kind of schools are getting more advice about how to set up those sensory spaces, that will have a knock-on effect sort of with that generation of being better equipped to look after their own sensory needs as they get into adulthood. I think it's really important. I didn't really understand how helpful a sensory space was until I had a baby and took her to get weighed, and they had a sensory space there, and she was a bit upset. So I took her into the sensory space, and I just, all of my tension just went, okay. And that was my first experience, was way into adulthood.
Yeah, in a really stressful situation that you then were able to manage because of that.
Yeah, and I'd never experienced a sensory room before because I'd never been given that opportunity as a kid. That was never an option.
I don't think I've ever been into one that I haven't found horrific. To be honest, I find them overstimulating.
That's
but then
interesting.
I think it might be the ADHD autism crossover, and like I get overstimulated by light quite easily, as I kind of mentioned before. Light sensitivity is quite high, but at the same time, when I first had my first like set of proper noise cancelling headphones, I was like, "Oh, these aren't coming off." I mean, that then created problems of desensitization needed to happen. So I was like, "Oh, the world is far too loud," when I take them off. But it's such an interesting. It's upskilling. I hate
it
that
is
term.
upskilling, though. I'm sorry.
Giving people the skills to
Yes.
better manage in their future existence from a young age.
Yeah.
You know, that would be such a valuable thing. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Of interest, Murray, do you think if you'd had access to a sensory space that you could have more control of? So it might be that you want really low lighting or not much going on. You don't want that noise. Do you think you could create a space that works for you? It's just that the generic ones that you've been offered, you haven't had that control for them to meet your needs?
Yes. It's one of those things where I think the control is a big element, and also when I get overstimulated, one of the things. Oh yeah, that was what I was going to say. Sorry, my brain just melted for a moment. for me, a lot of the things which are standard relaxing, which was where the air quotes came in, behaviors or things that are meant to be relaxing are friggin' irritating for me. So like soothing noise, it's like, that makes me want to, that hurts my ears. And stuff like that. And so like a lot of established and my sensory needs massively vary as well. I think it depends whether like ADHD side of my brain or autism side of my brain is more in prevalence, to reduce it a bit down to that. But I think that's a big thing because sometimes I'm really sensory seeking. Sometimes I'm completely sensory avoidant. So loads and loads of loud music sometimes and absolute silence others.
The control of it is really
Control
important.
is a big thing. Yeah, but control as long as I'm not affecting anyone else. Because my sense of empathy is so strong that I won't do. I've worked on this, so I will sometimes now do it. But my baseline is I won't do something if it could make someone else uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm like in a sensory space, I wouldn't control it in a way that'd be good for me.
Because you'd be worried about the other people.
In case there was someone else in there, like if there was someone else in there, just in case it made them uncomfortable. So that's a really interesting thing because I think at my autism assessment, they said that was for me a big part of my autism presentation, extreme empathy.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because with the schools, the pupils were using them by themselves. That's their preferred type of use. Sometimes there'll be another pupil, sometimes a teacher might come in. But I have thought, well, that's challenging because if you look at these publicly available spaces, there's certainly not I don't think many of them are a 1-in, 1-out policy. And how would that work? So it is about, how do we meet people's needs? And that's where I think maybe we need to start getting more creative about what solutions are. And as you say, that upskilling and skilling people to really start thinking about the importance of meeting sensory needs.
Yeah, and tolerating them as well. Just being like, actually, if this person needs to fiddle with that thing or have, like I had one earphone in for a lot of school, they allowed it because it was that would me soothe them after some stuff that happened before. But anyway, but like they didn't do it knowingly. But that actually, I think, looking back after I found out about the autism, enabled me to
made a big difference.
Do stuff, because I could control part of my sensory environment, put a headphone in, cancel out some of the other stuff that was going on in my brain at that point as well, and help sensorially as well.
Right, unfortunately, I've got to wrap things up, which is real sad because it's flown by. It's been so good to talk to you, Catherine. And can I say to anybody listening at home or watching us, if you've got thoughts on sensory rooms and on sensory issues, we'd love to hear from you. Drop something in the comments. If you've got a question for Catherine, we can pass it on.
We'll try and make. We'll see what resources that you've mentioned across your 2 episodes we can get.
We can pop some links
out
in
there because I think it'd be really interesting for people. More input in it. Data.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine, for joining us, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, that's it for this episode. You can follow us on Instagram at life.inthemind. Our other socials are linked in our bio. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. See you next time.